Jonathan Dunnett here from Ven Innovation, here with Paul Lypaczewski.
Hi everyone, great to be here.
Glad to have you joining us today, Paul. As folks that have been tuning in will know, we've been talking about competitive intelligence. We want to let companies know that this is very much a broad sector activity. So if you have a retail business, if you are a manufacturer, if you're an IT business, if you're in the seafood business, any of those things are quite suitable for this program, and we'd love to have you join us. We'll also put the links down below the video as well, so you can see what the training opportunities are. We'll just jump into the questions that we have here. So Island Capital Partners, of which you are a part, launched a $4 million fund earlier in 2017 to fund early stage companies. So I wondered, could you tell us a little bit about the fund? What are your goals and aims, and what's about the team as well?
Thanks, Jonathan. Again, thrilled to be part of this, and hi to the assembled group out there. And yeah, we're thrilled about the new fund that we started here on Prince Edward Island. As you said, it's a $4 million. In fact, it could. We're just closing off the investment round. There's going to be $2 million of provincial government money here on Prince Edward Island, and anywhere from $2 to $3 million of private investment from a small group of dedicated limited partners.
Okay.
I'm one of the 4 investment directors. It's I would dare say, an awesome group of people I'm hanging out with.
Right.
The 3 partners that I work with are Alex Macbeth, who was the former CEO of Grant Thornton Worldwide, and also ran their international business out of London, England, and Hong Kong. Steve Nicole, born on the island, has came out of BNR and then went into the startup business and working with some of the best venture funds in the world, including Climate Perkins.
Wow.
He got in Boston, in Toronto, in Nova Scotia, has had a number of successful companies, the most notable of which was he was the CEO of STI in Nova Scotia, which he left in 2015, but as many of you may already know, that's really the most successful exit that's happened in the region, probably since the purchase of Radiant 6, it's $200 million exit.
Right.
So Steve's one of the partners, and then Ron Keith, the former CEO of BioVectra, the huge success story for the Bio Alliance on Prince Edward Island, and one of the driving forces of the Bio Alliance. And if you look at, and myself, Paul Lypaczewski, I'm an IT exec that's gone over to pretending to be semi-retired. I started in aerospace. I'm an engineer that went over to the dark side and became a businessman, and have been involved in. I've run public NASDAQ companies. I've run pre-public companies. I've done startups and restarts. Generally in the area of graphics tools, hardware and software for creative professionals. Be that for animation, broadcast, video, gaming, the web, and things of that nature. But to one of the points that you made about whether this is IT specific, Jonathan, the management skills involved are sector agnostic.
Right.
Everyone faces the same sort of problems. You just apply them to different problem space. So this fund is is focused on the high growth potential PEI companies. And when we say PEI, there's it has to have a significant presence or effect on the island.
Okay.
My hero Jerry Pond, as he says, if we don't work together as a region, we will find it very difficult to succeed as a region. And so we are working closely with regional companies, but there has to be a credible link to the island for us to be involved.
Right.
It's early stage for those companies that have started off with the sort of funding you can get from the provincial funding agencies and the COA, but have yet to take a lot of private investment. So we're a seed fund. Yeah. Typically putting several hundreds of thousands of dollars into these startups as we bring them to the point where a Series A round can take place.
Right, right. And so you would work in conjunction as well, depending on the deal, with other partners potentially on that seed round as well?
Exactly. Sometimes we lead. Sometimes we'll be part of a round that's being run by a number of other players, bigger players.
Right.
So it's we firmly believe in doing what makes sense.
Always a good thing, for sure.
We're practice.
Excellent. Appreciate that. Some folks might not know generally what's happening on Prince Edward Island or across Atlantic Canada, oftentimes we tend to hear the negative aspects of, well, you know, we might be a have-not, which I don't believe, and I don't think you do either. So I wondered if you could just share a few examples of what's got you excited that you're seeing both from a PEI perspective and a regional perspective.
And as you can tell, with a name like Lypaczewski, I'm from away. I've chosen to come here because of the quality of life that you can have in this region, but B, because of what's happening.
Right.
And there's a vibrant startup community in all sorts of sectors, whether it's aerospace, whether it's IT, whether it's biomedical, whether it's green technologies. There's just a ton of stuff happening. And all these smart, young companies that have a massive potential, but they need mentorship, they need resources, they need talent. And speaking from the standpoint of the fund, we became officially real only within the last month after all the paperwork got signed and the ink dried on them. Okay. We have a pipeline of about 17 companies.
Wow.
And across a broad range of companies. As you know, because you see me almost once a month, I'm also affiliated and do some mentorship at the Dunnett Center.
Right.
And to the credit of New Brunswick, there's a burgeoning ecosystem in Fredericton, in St. John, in Moncton. A lot of credit returning to Jerry Pond and his partners at East Valley Ventures. You know, they've been fostering that ecosystem, programs like the McCain Institute, with the collaboration of organizations such as Bend and Planet Hatch and NBIF. You go to Nova Scotia with the InnovaCorp, with the Volta Center, with the other investment fund that Nova Scotia is putting together, and then the two incubators in Newfoundland, and the Polaris Venture Fund that's there. Right. The one that Propel provides pan-regionally. There's just a lot of opportunity here for this startup community. There's the traditional industries will be important in perpetuity, but as I say, there is more to life than farming and fishing and tourism. Yeah. And these are opportunities that can be transformational to our region's economy, and that's kind of what gets me up and going.
And it's neat to see, too, I think, some of the opportunities that are present for some of those more traditional industries that you mentioned, and how we're able to bring in new and innovative ideas even within those sectors to help those grow as well.
Which is exactly what the McCains are doing. Right. And in Arkansas, there's these two little companies. One is Walmart, and mental block here. There's a second huge Arkansas company, and they realized, they say, we're not innovative. We're too big to be innovative, but we can work with innovators. And so Colin Deacon, who has been a very successful tech entrepreneur in Nova Scotia and is now the entrepreneur in residence at the Startup Zone, he's pushing for an initiative on demand-driven innovation, where even the traditional industries can be teamed up with young entrepreneurs who can solve problems that they have and solve real-world problems in innovative ways, which will be a good segue into the importance of competitive intelligence.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And so with that, we'll absolutely roll into that and segue there. So we're really excited to bring competitive intelligence training across Atlantic Canada. So as I mentioned, we're doing this in conjunction with regional partners. So this is across all sectors. And I wanted to get your perspective. So from the standpoint of an investor, of which you are, why is competitive intelligence training important for companies that are seeking an investment, that are coming to you? Ultimately, what are the sorts of things that you want to see? What are the things you want to see from them? And so I guess, why is training important, and what ultimately are you seeking in those companies?
Exactly. And I'd like to take it that way, because first and foremost, why is it important to the company?
Yes.
And I like to break things down into sort of three chunks. For the companies, and whether you're a startup or a company that's trying to grow, or even an established company that's trying to move into new markets, right? There's the three key things. There's who's your customer, what's the market ecosystem in which they live, and who's the competition?
Right.
hence competitive intelligence.
Right.
But you don't know who your competition is unless you know who your customer is in the first place. And so starting there, and one of the big challenges for many companies, and particularly for startups, is people don't necessarily know who their customer is.
Right.
A lot of companies, they say, oh, well, who's going to buy your product? Oh, everybody's going to buy your product.
Right.
Oh, and why? Because it's neat.
Right.
Well, neat is neat, but at the end of the day, you solve something. And it may sound obvious, but it's surprising how many people fall foul of this. That you don't start from a technology and then try and find a solution to throw it at. You start from a real world problem, and then you figure out how to solve it.
Right.
Which means you know who your customer is. So first, what problem are you solving? But then there's the other dynamic, which, how do you know what the problem is unless you know what the industry is, unless you know what their work practice is, unless you know what their workflow is, and which will get into the ecosystem as well. But then also, your customer, there's a number of people in that customer's workflow.
Yeah.
The customer is the person who gives you money.
Right.
And again, it sounds trite, but using my experience in the animation business, we were building animation tools for all the major studios. And so we did a lot of work with Disney. It was good fun, although our user was the animator. So we had to enrich the life of the person who was doing the animation, but our customer was the studio head. Because they needed to be convinced that there was an economic benefit to their company to spend all the money that was necessary to buy the tools, change the workflow, train the people, maintain the systems, which is of fundamental importance. So having the intelligence of the particular marketplace you're going at, also when you're trying to grow your business, you're going after new markets. Amidst all that myriad of opportunities, which are the ones that provide you the best opportunity?
Right.
Because you ask a company, well, what's your market opportunity? The web is a $100 billion market.
Right.
Okay. What's your total addressable market? Oh, everything.
Right.
No. We're building such and such a thing for the web, which represents 10% of the user population, which represents 5% of their workflow, which represents X amount of their spend. So how do you decompose that and actually do a credible analysis of what your total addressable market is in the space that you're going after?
Yes.
And then what do you think what the reasonable market penetration is going to be? Because it's not going to be 100%.
Right.
Not everyone will be Facebook.
Right.
And so unless you define your own markets, which then is a different thing altogether. So that's a big part of it. But then it takes us into the ecosystem. And how do the companies interact? Companies fail at a company, for example. It's one thing we're going to sell to the government. We've solved their problem, all well and good. But as for those of us who've successfully done business with the government, it's a complicated beast. Right. Because it's not just, what makes sense and what the organization is willing to do is not always aligned. We're working with a smart young company on PEI that's building a revolutionary video production solution, which will change the way that people communicate on the set, save time, effort, and money. All well and good. And so it's an excellent solution. Some of the things are that, again, the customer is the person who controls the production budget who would ultimately decide to use that solution. Right. And if there isn't a line item on the production budget for a solution that they hadn't anticipated they need, you can't sell with it. So that's one thing that you need to know in terms of your market. Then there's the other, it's a realistic part of the production space is at least half of the productions are used unionized trades. Right. And so if you're going in with a value proposition that says you can run your production with 10% fewer people and that's how you're going to get your return on investment, then the people who are going to use your solution will say, well, wait a minute, you're taking union jobs out of the ecosystem, and that's not right. Right. And a specific example, the reason this is a very real thing, the way they got past that is the solution had to be provided with a button that somebody had to turn on.
Right.
And so it then fit into the accepted workflow, and no union jobs were at risk, and then the union was actually very happy to embrace the solution.
Right.
So it's very important matters just like that to understand that market ecosystem, and also understand how the market, even at a macroscopic level, can be averaged. What are the things that are changing the markets? That most of the best opportunities are tend to occur when there is change happening into a market and people are in fear of losing their market share or their businesses outright.
Right.
So if you know the macroscopic trends of the market that you're involved in, this helps you define the opportunities, which can be be of fundamental. Like we built 3D design tools for the automotive space, and Ford said it costs us $1 billion to launch a new car. And it takes us five years to do it, and predominantly because it was all done in clay. And despite the current advertisements that still espouse the merits of clay, it's a fundamental part of the workflow. Because since Moses came down the mountain with tablets, industrial designers has used clay, and it's tactile and it's visual and it's all really good. But the Japanese were coming out with cars with 2.5-year design cycles, and Detroit had 5-year design cycles, and they fundamentally had to change things. So this was an opportunity to segue and change the workflow in terms of how exterior audio design was done. So that's really the customer, the market in which they live, and then another big mistake, particularly in startups, that people make is one last thing on the market ecosystem. Companies tend to underestimate their window of opportunity.
Yes.
That you don't get to decide how long the market will be willing to wait and buy your solution. And so whether you're running a startup or an established company, if you don't get up in the morning feeling that if you're not ready, you're already late, you can't just say, oh, well, we'll get to it next week. Because there is a clock ticking, and you have to understand what that window of opportunity is, because it will close. And that will segue into the importance of having access to capital in a timely manner. So moving from that into the competition, the other big sin is that people either don't know their competition or they underestimate them. And we tell companies, competition is actually a really good thing. Because we counsel companies that if there's no competition, it means you're probably addressing a crummy little market that doesn't matter in it. Unless you want to build a lifestyle business, which is great. And I'm not meaning to disparage that. But if you're in the business of creating something which can be of significant value to a significant number of people, you're going to have competition. So the question isn't if you will, the question is what you're going to do about it. And so that's why it's essential to know who your competitors are, how do they differ from you, what sustainable competitive advantage you can put in place, and you can only where you can carve out a slice where potentially you can make yourself one of your competitors a collaborator. We're working with one company that is doing web design similar to what's historically done on WordPress, but now being done with open source tools. And there's a well-funded competitor out of the valley, but they're addressing the whole website space, including the production, the management, the hosting, the data. And so they kind of have a Me Too solution for authoring, and this is a company that's wholly focused on authoring. So this is an area that if you know what the strengths and weaknesses are of that competitor, you can position yourself. And on your launch page, you talk about competitors. Are they, we always used to say, we're perfectly happy if our competitors are aiming to be what we're like right now. Because if you're a healthy business, you already have your plans in terms of where you hope to be in 1 year, 2 years, potentially 3. Understanding that the accuracy with which you can predict those things diminishes greatly over time. But so understanding what the trajectory of those competitors are doing, and so you're not aiming for where they're at, you're aiming for where they're trying to get to and get there faster.
The old Wayne Gretzky quote, go where the puck is going, right?
Go where the puck is going, exactly, well said. So you have to know your competitors, and they are out there, and without that you can't craft a strategic plan.
Absolutely. And just to speak to that too a little bit more, one of the things that I think is really neat, and you addressed that very coherently, Jonathan Kaloff, who's delivering our first session, I had an opportunity to see him a few months back, and he talked about the data piece, and I think what's important with this is he broke it down into three sort of buckets. You have primary research, you have secondary information, which is probably what most people are accustomed to, which is the Googling, the primary being asking customers, talking to them, understanding what their needs are, or just talking to people one-on-one, and then there's big data. And really the role of competitive intelligence these days is to use one or all of these together to help inform exactly what you were just saying. So what's the market, what's the ecosystem, what are my competitors doing? And so even for companies that may not have extensive experience and say, well, I don't think this is for me, I don't really do that, or I don't understand how to do that, it's very accessible. And that's one of the things that I really like about Dr. Kaloff's delivery, is that he makes it very accessible and understandable. And the fact that he's going to be mentoring these companies through, I think, will really help it to be successful as well.
No, I couldn't agree more, John. I would posit that you have to do all three. You know, we tell our customers, tell our companies, that's a really nice idea, go talk to the customer. And getting into how we make investment decisions, we talk to the customers that companies are talking to, and we talk to customers they're not talking to. And they'll get different feedback. So, you know, the customer is in fact right, and some of them are better at it than others. Some make it painful, but you know, it's their problem that you're solving. And so that primary, and then in terms of understanding the competition and what's happening, as we say on the Google is an incredibly valuable thing.
Yes.
But big data is essential as well, because, you know, we talk about the macroeconomic trends and that. So I would dare say all three pieces are fundamental to understanding customer, market, competition.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it hits not only for just startup companies, but really mature companies as well.
No, absolutely, because growth is everything.
Yes.
Unless, you know, if you're not growing, you're dying.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And you know, your market, how you grow, people have probably seen the charts with S curves, how a product goes, it starts off with a thin revenue trail, and then it goes up really fast, and then ultimately you get into the mature market, and it levels off again, which is when you're supposed to be starting up another S if you intend to have your company last a long time.
Right.
How do you do that? And you can take the same thing and sell it to different people. You can take a different thing and sell it to the same people.
Right.
In the risk continuum, trying to do a different thing for a different group of people, while not impossible, is usually called the valley of death.
Right.
So, but whether you're taking your thing to different markets or taking new solutions to the same market, it's the same thing all over again.
Right.
Whose problem are you solving? What's the market ecosystem, and what's the competition in that space? So you're always doing it. It's never done.
Yeah, exactly. And finally, just to cap off today, so you've got some great extensive background. You mentioned that you went to the dark side from being an aerospace engineer, and you had a really interesting array of experience operationally. So I wondered if you could speak to, maybe for startups and more mature companies as well, why is it important for companies really to have a strong grounding in this from an everyday standpoint to help inform what they're doing?
And rounding out the company is the best way to describe it, to use your words. It's particularly in the startup space, it tends to be innovation driven, where you have founders that have a neat idea, and then they try and they grow a company around that idea. Or sometimes it's someone with business savvy who then looks for co-founders who can help build the idea they came up with. But over the growth of that company, you need to have that full set of skills, because having a good product is necessary but not sufficient.
Right.
How are you going to do your outreach, aka marketing?
Right.
How are you going to sell,
Mm-hmm.
aka customers?
Right.
So they're fundamental parts of a successful company. How will the market trends affect the growth and costs of the company, aka finance? So these, when I was managing large development organizations, the overall budget of the development organization typically was anywhere from 15 to 20% of the company's revenues.
Mm-hmm.
Sales and marketing would be about 35%.
Wow.
And most companies fundamentally underestimate how expensive and how much money is required for successful sales and marketing.
Mm. Yes.
Because it's you can be so enamored with your solution that people are just going to come to you and
Build it and they
knock on
come,
your
right?
door. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the disciplines that you're fostering through the competitive intelligence are essential to build a healthy, growing company across the entire all the various disciplines that make up a fully formed company.
Right.
And it's something that you alluded to. These are the things that are important to us as investors. We know that particularly as a seed investor in the startup space, there are going to be skill gaps because it's a startup.
Yeah.
But are these teams that are aware of what their skill gaps are? Are these teams to be aware of what you don't know,
right,
and what you have to learn is already a good sign, because I tell people I'm not done yet. I don't know it all, but
right.
You hope one fosters an opportunity to be self-aware and know, well, I don't know this. How am I going to learn this?
Right.
And so that's why this program, I think, is a huge opportunity for people.
Yeah. Well, excellent. And again, Paul, I want to extend our thanks from Ben for you joining us today. We're thrilled to have you with us to give that perspective. And to those folks that are out there, this is an amazing training opportunity.
It's a no-brainer.
It is absolutely a no-brainer. We'll put the link below. We're really excited about it. I hope you are too. And again, Paul, thank you so much for your time today. Have a great day, everyone.
Sure. Thanks so much, Jonathan. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, Paul.